After not really getting gripped by the Silent Hill quadrilogy, especially Silent Hill 2, now that we're getting down the list of the Silent Hill series, the context is beginning to show why Konami was hitting the mark with an expert precision and grace. For Silent Hill's next iteration, we return to the heads of Climax Studio to see if they can pull something exhilarating from the hellish pit that is Silent Hill's other half. What it says on the tin is that Climax had accomplished the faithful remake of Silent Hill in 2010, and that was a great idea going in, because while Silent Hill was an incredibly solid game, there were some difficulty spiking issues and programming problems indicative of it coming out on the PSX that could have been easily fixed if Climax didn't toss the whole thing into the creative control shredder. Don't believe the box blurb for a second, because this game is so far removed from the original survival horror game that it'd need a 10-man crew to have the slightest hope of even finding it. The first thing that Climax wanted to change in Silent Hill was to psychologically profile the player to better fit its scares to the audience on an individual level. As gaming has progressed in its eras, this isn't a new idea for horror games with concepts like the Wii Vitality Sensor and Alien Isolation sound sensing features that use the player themselves to change gameplay and get them more immersed into what's going on. What that means in Shuttered Memories is that every time the player finishes a chapter, they have to play a psychological game made up by the developers to try and dig into the player's head. The concept failed miserably because while Climax is trying to individualize the game to everybody, they still have to generalize it down as much as possible to appeal to everybody, and sometimes it's frankly insulting. After chapter 2 is finished, the player has to color in a picture of a house, and after 15 minutes of painstakingly fiddling with the PSP's notorious control stick to get all the colors in the right place, the only thing that changed in the game was the color of a door. And then later you have to answer some questions about what the player liked about school, and the only thing that changed in that part was that the game locked out half of its puzzles. And speaking of lazy, one of Silent Hill's defining traits was the other hill sections where the entire game got dark, rusty, and hellish that put the player on edge for the whole thing, with highly damaging enemies and nonsensical puzzles. What Shattered Memories decided to do is replace all of that with the same section replayed 7 times, in which the world freezes over and Harry is chased by faceless monsters. While Silent Hill constantly irritated the player and immersed them into a world that flat out hated their guts, Shattered Memories' idea of what's scary is pathetic because the player has no idea where they are going and they can't defend themselves beyond sprinting, and obviously they can't outrun the monsters because this has to be a horror game. What makes these sections even more pointless is that dying during them throws Harry right back to the start, so there's no stakes to losing in these nightmares. The only upside during these is that Harry is given some semblance of direction with an objective marker on his phone, but the last nightmare level has nothing. You are literally running around in the endgame with no idea where you are going and what the hell's going on. So the other hill sections are stupid bullshit, but the rest of the game is actually really boring. See, one of Silent Hill's great points was it had brilliant puzzle design where it was able to blend clever riddles with common sense problem solving to give brilliant, satisfactory gameplay to the player. But Climax ended up throwing this entirely out into the creative control shredder as well, and most of the puzzles are lazy baby's first puzzles. Most of them are key finding puzzles, and that sometimes they're not even puzzles. Look at this one for the schoolhouse. It's literally walk around until you find the thing with the key in it and open it to get a key. As you can see, this was obviously a Wii game because it did a lot of the moronic point and click moments where players could pretend to be opening doors with their own hands, and that staggering level of innovation made them spooge their trousers. Where Climax decided to try and make clever puzzles, they fell down the stairs head first due to the failure to see answers or make the puzzle work in the first place. All the while, Harry struggles in finding Cheryl. The player is on the other end serving as the framing device. After the game starts with the Silent Hill car crash and a faithful remake scene, we're shown that the player is meeting with an unorthodox psychologist to deal with the trauma of surviving Silent Hill, and apparently this is their last chance. The psychologist was a good character since he's exactly as supportive and condescending as you'd expect from an alcoholic off-brand expert that solves all his problems with stupid picture tests. Throughout the game, we all thought the person he was interviewing was Harry for obvious reasons, but after a bunch of Silent Hill beatings, Harry ended up at the lighthouse and we found that, spoilers ahead, that the person being the framing device for Shattered Memories was the 25-year-old Cheryl who survived that car crash. Yep, got rickrolled right at the end. The twist ending of the game is horrible for so many reasons. The biggest is that it makes the horror of the horror game totally illogical because Cheryl had no possible way of experiencing it. She had zero contact with the other Hill and essentially cobbled together what we did as Harry from all the time she's been walking around town. The twist is so completely stupid because we have someone walking around town being dreamed up by a totally different person from the past, and he's talking to and meeting people from the present. So that makes a bucket full of sense. And then there was Climax's incredible idea to bastardize all the characters from the original game. Instead of the guy risking death to save his daughter, in Shattered Memories, Harry was rewritten into this aggravating asshole that cheats on his wife with Lisa, who was changed into a prostitute with a thing for nurse fetishes because, hey, that's hilarious. The old battle axe Dahlia was transformed into an aloof, horny 20-something to act as a reward for Harry doing a good job. And finally, there was Cheryl herself, who Climax had brilliantly remade into a deadbeat shoplifter. Maybe Climax wanted to have these fun surprises in the game to show off how clever its what-if plot was. But honestly, the only real revelation in this game was how bad of an idea it was to tie it to Silent Hill, and to call it a Silent Hill remake is disgraceful because they have almost nothing in common. This is a bad Silent Hill iteration all of its own that holds up none of the original's good graces, full of tedious key hunting and avoiding monsters and filling in the rest of the atmosphere with out-of-context phone calls from people that don't even exist. If Climax decided to simply start its own IP with this game, it would have been a fine game with a suite of non-lethal issues. But when you want to run with the big boys, you can't trip up at the second hurdle. Well, that was a disappointing mess of a Wii port, but the one good thing about Shattered Memories is that this can't possibly get worse. So next time we'll be looking at one of the other Western Silent Hills to see if they've got anything to show for themselves, but until that time, here's the final score. And a great victory for gamers from Kaz. I'll see you guys on the other side.